Um, okay. And then, sitting here for a second. So I'll do like a quick intro and then we'll like just jump right into it.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
go for it.
All right. So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about Chapter 8 of Steve Blank and Bob Dorf's book, The Startup Owner's Manual. My name is Jon Eckhardt. I'm professor at UW-Madison, and I'm editor-in-chief at the Entrepreneurship Innovation Exchange. And I'm here with Dan Reich, a 2008 graduate from University of Wisconsin School of Engineering, and a career entrepreneur, as I at least would describe him. We'll see if he describes himself that way as well. He's currently involved in leading two companies, a company called Troops and Tula Skincare, has successfully exited companies in the past, and is also a writer for Forbes.com. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So I just first started and ask you to share with us a little bit about your background as a student entrepreneur. If I remember correctly, you were banging away at entrepreneurship even before you graduated.
Yeah, that's right. In college, it's funny. I was just having this conversation with my friend and co-founder. But in college, we started two companies in Madison. The first was called Runaway Productions. It was an events and marketing company where we would host exactly what I said, events and basically parties, and we bring in local and national sponsors. And so that was a really, really fun business as a college student. And then we started another company called thecampusoutlet.com, which was in effect a student portal for any college kid on campus to find everything that they would need: drink specials, informations on restaurants, bars, student professor ratings, class schedules, you name it. We rolled that out to about 8 college campuses, and then we got involved in other things. But yeah, so we did 2 companies in college and more since.
And how did you like balance this running companies while also in student? Like, how'd that work out?
Carefully. It was just a ton of work. So those 2 companies I started with a friend, Steve Weissman. He was also studying engineering with me. And so what we did is we had scheduled the exact same schedules. Literally every single class was identical. And so what we would do is we'd get up in the morning, we'd head over to engineering hall, and we'd have all our classes, and we would just stay there from the morning till night. And in between, we would either be studying, doing homework, or working on our businesses. Then by the time we get home, we would work on our businesses a little bit more, and then we'd go out. But that was our schedule, Monday to Friday, and a lot of work on the weekends as well, as you can imagine.
And would you recommend this to students to start a business while they're in school?
I would recommend starting a business in school, yes, but you have to be, you got to be excited and passionate. And the reason I would is the way I always felt about it is, if we started a business in college and it didn't work and we failed, worst case scenario is we just get up the next morning and go to class. It's not like you're in the real world and have kids, a mortgage, and real responsibilities. It's like, if it doesn't work out, you go to class the next day and on you go. So moreover, not only do you have a bit of a safety net, but you have an immense support network around you. You're literally in a university with amazing people, like you, that teach for a living and are there to help students for a living that have a lot of experience here. And so we did that as well. When we started our second company, in fact, we had one of our engineering professors help us, and we did it as an independent study. So not only did we get help from a professor to build our business, we actually also got credits, independent study credits to do it. So it was really 1 + 1 = 5. So I think, great time to do it. The last thing I'll mention is, when you're younger and in school, you don't know what you don't know. And so you have the benefit of some naivety, if you will, where you can take chances, probably more chances than older folks would take, where they've seen a lot more and are probably jaded and afraid by all of those things they've seen. So when you're younger and in school, you don't you haven't seen all of those things, you get the benefit as a result.
Do you feel like you earned lower grades than you would have otherwise because your time was split between your business life and your scholastic life, or not?
So thinking back, the worst semester I had in school is when I surprise, surprise, studied the least and partied the most. The best semester I had in school in terms of grades is when I had the most credits and also the busiest I ever was with my businesses.
So you just kind of learned how to put it all together, I guess.
Yeah, I think, in hindsight, and I see that I see this even today in my current businesses and ventures, especially with now a kid at home. When you are busier, you have to get really, really good at prioritization and time management. And when you're running a company, arguably the most important thing you can do is prioritize, because the things that you prioritize inevitably become the most important things that become the step functions and catalysts for the business. And so prioritization and time management goes hand in hand with building a successful company. And so, yeah, again, I saw this firsthand. It was the first time I really appreciated this when I was the busiest ever that semester in terms of credits, and had 4.0 GPA. That was the only semester I had that GPA, but also the most success and traction we saw with our companies that semester as well.
Got it. Like one of the things I've noticed as a professor is that the students that are starting companies in school, that they're often much more drilled in, at least in the business classes, because they're learning and using a lot of what they're learning in the classroom, and then they're applying it. And they're often like better students in the sense that they'll sometimes come and say like, hey, like that last class or that chapter, like it wasn't that useful. Like I tried it, it didn't work, or it's too abstract or something like that. And so they have a much more engaged relationship with the material, and they're better able to kind of assess like what's useful and what's not. One other thing I wanted to ask you, and I do get this question from time to time, a student shows up in my office and they're contemplating dropping out of school for their business. And, what advice would you give to someone who's facing that decision?
Also a great question. Look, I thought about that as well when I was in school a handful of times. There isn't a right or wrong here. And the parents would tell you, don't drop out of school. Of course they would. And moreover, society would tell you, don't drop out of school. At the same time, moreover, like today, I don't believe the institution of school is what it used to be. Like you can go on, as we all know, you can go on Google or YouTube and within minutes get access to anyone or any piece of information that you determine to be important to accelerate whatever it is you're working on. And so I guess in short, to answer that question, I would only consider dropping out of school if you've got insane conviction, like really, really great conviction in the idea, because you also have really great proof points. The classic story of Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of school. I have another friend that is wildly successful. He dropped out of school. He only has like 2 or 3 credits left to graduate. He's never going to go back. But they did that after they had seen traction with their business. And so to my earlier comment, I believe it's a really good recipe to be able to start a company while at school. And if you see enough traction, and that's the question mark, what does enough mean? Then at that point, honestly, it wouldn't be crazy to think about dropping out of school, but the devil's in the details on what enough means or what traction means.
Yeah, like where I sit, I completely agree with you. There's really no like right answer. It's kind of more how it fits with each individual person and kind of their circumstances. I do often toss up a third option, which is, a lot of times I'm talking to an engineering student or students just in a demanding major, and I'll say, hey, why don't you pick a major that's really not as demanding and get bad grades and focus on your business, but also finish school. And some of the benefits of finishing school is you have like a fallback plan, like you mentioned before. And you're also sort of part of a community that over your lifetime really wants to support you, your alumni network, you're kind of closer tied to them. And I also have had the benefit of, talking with entrepreneurs who've made both of these decisions, in their mid 40s and 50s. And a lot of times the students that are like, a semester shy of graduation or whatever, which is actually quite common where this decision point is being made, or maybe they're a year short, they kind of have this sense of like an unfinished thing that they're just not that happy about, especially since entrepreneurs tend to be like those that are the finisher through the challenges. And I think some of them would have been happier, if they could imagine themselves doing everything, which is often not realistic, happier just finishing with something than not finishing. Having said that, like there are several UW students who I know that have that did stop their education and doing quite well with their businesses. So like you said earlier, it's really in the end. where
Yeah,
people
I get it. Literally I have a friend that has 2 credits left from an Ivy League school. And if he takes any class, he can get his degree, and he won't, and he doesn't need to. And it's almost like a fun, not game, but like a badge of honor, if you will, for him that he came that close, won't finish, and doesn't want to. Me personally, I always envision I would go to graduate school, whether it be medical school or get my MBA. And sometimes every once in a while, I do think about like how fun that could have been, or that extra level of accomplishment. But again, like, not required. And it's a means to the end. And if you really envision yourself as being an entrepreneur and building businesses, I believe the best school for that is the school of hard knocks, right? It's getting your hands dirty, learning the hard way. That is irreplaceable. And you're not going to get that in any institution, but you will get that by banging your head against the wall and getting punched in the face over and over again, trying to do it the hard way.
Yeah. So we'll dive into the book just a minute. One more comment is you might find Jim Burby an inspiring person for you if you've heard about him. He's a UW-Madison alum. Started a company called Burby Information Systems, I think it was, and sold it to CDW. And then went to med school, a completely different career turn, became an ER emergency room doc. And it's kind of, he's involved in business, but has that also additional kind of path that he took. So it's a long life you get to live. And finishing up that degree probably made that possible. So, yeah. So let's dive into the book. I appreciate that kind of tangent. So this chapter here is about introduction to customer discovery and customer validation. And I think it's really good to think through this around maybe your 2 most recent businesses. So you're currently I think CEO of Troops, and then there's this other company involved in a skincare space. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, actually.
Tula Skincare.
Tula Skincare, which I mentioned earlier. Why don't you talk us through those 2 companies and what do they do? And then we'll kind of weave it into the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start with Tula because that was the company started first. But Tula Skincare is, per the name, it's a skincare company that has developed a line of products and skincare products with probiotics and superfoods that's clean, clinical, and effective. And so that business is now private equity backed. I have 2 partners on that business. One comes out of the beauty industry. The other comes out of the medical world, who's a gastroenterologist. And, that business came about because we had a unique opportunity to assemble a very complementary team that collectively are very experienced, and also similarly had a unique opportunity to launch a brand with one of the largest retailers in the world. And so it was just a situation where like all of these stars were aligning for an opportunity that I never would have in a million years thought I would be pursuing, but only pursued because it's like if there's a huge door open and someone's just telling you to walk through it, it's like you kind of have to walk through if it makes sense. So I walked through that door and it was a great decision. That business now is probably one of the fastest growing beauty companies in the world, fastest growing brand in Ulta, which is one of the retailers that we've partnered with. And it's just been amazing to see. And as that business was getting started, I realized that I am not as passionate running a women's skincare company day to day. And there's probably people better than me out there that are suited to do so. Someone made a comment to me not too long ago. They described entrepreneurship like video games, which I love to play video games. And so what I realized with that company is it was a fun video game, but not the video game that I wanted to play. And so I hired someone to basically take my job as CEO, and I fired myself. And then I went and started Troops, and which is way more in line with my background as a technology person and electrical and computer engineer. But what is Troops? So Troops is a venture-backed software company that is building a workflow and automation platform that connects back office systems at organizations like Salesforce and Zendesk and HubSpot with these new enterprise messaging interfaces like Slack and Microsoft Teams. And so that business now is working with companies and customers like Slack, Twilio, Shopify, Cameo, and many, many more of the fast growing tech companies. And what's been really pretty crazy and validating to see with that business is we started that company 5 years ago with this idea that CRM, customer relationship management software, needed to be violently married with or really intelligently married with and intertwined with messaging. At the time, 6 of the top 10 most used apps in the world were messaging apps. And so it seems so inevitable that something like a Salesforce should live in something like a Slack. And so we were the first company to really do that and lean in. And fast forward to today, we now know that Salesforce has acquired Slack for $30 billion, the second largest technology acquisition ever, like literally ever, and the largest acquisition Salesforce has ever made. And so when that happened, that told us that, we were onto something, and exciting to think about the fact that this is now just really getting started. If you look at the investments being made by Microsoft and others in that space, I think everyone's now realizing that the new quote operating system has shifted away from the PC or personal computer to much more of a team and collaborative dimension, especially this past year with COVID and remote work more than ever. And so that's my day job now with Troops. But yeah, those are the two companies, Tula and Troops.
You give us your pitch. Like if you're knocking on a door and you want somebody to adopt Troops, who is that? Whose door are you knocking on? What kind of person are you talking with? What's the role in your organization? And then, and what do you say? What's the pitch?
That's a great question. One I just, in fact, had with my commercial team. The answer is it depends, right? So I'll give you two examples. The value proposition to, let's say, a sales rep is that all of a sudden now they can update Salesforce just as easy as it would be texting a friend. And they don't have to log into these big, heavy, bloated databases and painful interfaces with a lot of context switching. So it feels like they have a digital assistant at their fingertips. So that would be a pitch to an account executive or an individual contributor sales rep. A pitch to, let's say, an executive or a CEO would be, hey, wouldn't you like to have real-time visibility or a pulse on the organization by seeing in real time the most important signals and things happening or not happening in your organization? Wouldn't you like to know if your top 3 deal is at risk for churning? Or wouldn't you like to know if your biggest deal of all time is about to close or could close if it only received a little help from the product team or from you? And so my point is it depends. And so for Troops, we craft to a degree, we craft the value prop or pitch based on the buyer, based on the persona, or based on the individual that we're speaking to. Well, I was at Salesforce after they acquired my last company. And as part of my job, I needed to ensure my team was not only selling, but updating the accounts that they were selling and managing into Salesforce so that the broader organization could see what was happening. And so part of my job fundamentally was a babysitter, right? I would go around and poke and prod people and ask them to make updates into these systems. And that was an immense amount of friction and tension. And now with Troops, we automate that. And so it's not your manager or boss babysitting you, but it's this technology that, again, to the end user feels almost like a digital assistant that's saying, hey, John, it looks like you said these 5 deals were going to close last week and they didn't. What's the deal? Can you please make the update? And with the click of a update in context, in Slack or Teams, in seconds, they're making the updates back to the respective database, which then in turn gets disseminated once again through Troops back to the broader organization so that the product team knows how the product is selling or not. The executives know how the team is tracking and growing or not, and so on and so on.
Got it. So one of the, so it's more of like enabling in making the organization more efficient, like at all levels. So one of the primary arguments of this book is that startups should be managed differently than larger organizations. And in particular, the fundamental issue that you want to avoid is overinvesting too early in building out the organization itself before you know exactly what you need. And the thesis of the book is, look, you need to discover if your product has legs, and you have to understand what channels are you going to be selling it through. then you build your organization essentially around those channels, producing the product, but then, and if you hire your marketing team too early or sales team too early, you could be hiring for the wrong channel, right? People that don't understand the particular path to sell. And I wanted to ask you, like, what are your general thoughts on that thesis? Because the other side of it that they also mentioned in the book is that, look, there's pressure to just go fast, build your organization, build a sales team, figure out everything along the way. And here they're really saying, don't go so fast here. First, figure out what your channel is, who you're selling to, and then build it out.
Yeah. I've seen all flavors of this and lived through all flavors. And so my general thoughts and my opinion on the right answer is the following. I think for the book, like the right answer probably most of the time is you should, with as little as possible, experiment and understand if those experiments work or not. And if they work, then you can lean in and invest behind those experiments. Just as an illustrative example, if I were a consumer company and I needed to know if Facebook advertising worked or if retail worked, like I'm not going to go hire a sales team, an in-store sales team that's going to manage those stores if I'm not even in the store or haven't tested or experimented with it. Or same is true as Facebook or digital advertising. I'm not going to go build a huge digital advertising team if I don't know if it works or not. Having said that, like you do need enough resources, people, and infrastructure to do the experiment in a way that's successful and gives it a shot at being successful. So like I remember in the early days of Tula, I would have this debate with my partner all the time about, and he would say, you never want to build the business or the infrastructure ahead of the business. That was his motto. But then I remember having debates around like we needed to hire, these one or two people, because if we did, they would help ensure that the experiments would be successful. Moreover, they would accelerate the degree in which we executed the experiments. So I think there's always a healthy tension around the edges, but I do think just more broadly, like it is definitely not prudent to go build a big infrastructure around something that is undefined. There are cases though where, and you see this often you kind of alluded to this, venture-backed companies or private equity-backed companies that are given a boatload of money and they need to grow at all costs. And so you do see companies that make that bet without a whole lot of proof, and they build out the infrastructure. And sometimes they get it right and sometimes they don't. In the cases where they get it right, great, it pays off, it's a huge win. In the cases where they don't, they just burn through all that cash, they burn through equity, and then often you have companies that are sort of upside down. The cap table is messed up or whatever. And so, yeah, like I think both can be true on balance, but definitely personally for me, never a fan of building crazy infrastructure ahead of proof in the business.
It kind of sounds like to me that what Blank and Dorf are saying is that, once you know what channel you're going to sell into, you hire people that are experts in that channel, that are passionate about your product, and you kind of build out that part of the infrastructure. And then you're saying, you're adding on to that, basically saying, yeah, but you need enough people around you that are going to help you figure out these channels and do the experiments and do all that kind of work for you and for the organization. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, how do you put those pieces together? And in particular, the folks that are hired to be, let's call them the experimenters, what's their career trajectory? Do they move to the next startup, or do you do you mold them over time and help have them grow with the organization into certain kind of roles, or like what's your thought on that?
Yeah. So the experimenters, let's call them, as you put them, the experimenters by definition are the ones that are really like on the front lines, coming up with hypotheses and chartering into unknown territory, and proving what does and does not work in that territory. Like that is what a founder is. And founders, the good ones are inherent, in my opinion, are like insanely curious, have this ridiculous appetite for learning and experimenting. And so all that happens once you've kind of proven out those experiments in general is you realize that you're going to move on to the next one in that organization, right? So maybe you've proven out a paid marketing channel, but now you need to go figure out the hiring experiment, like how you're going to hire world-class talent, or maybe you need to figure out partnerships, or maybe you need to figure out the next product line. Like, you're basically the tip of the spear in new business development or commercialization. That skill set, in my opinion, is the most valuable skill set today in any organization, just given the pace of change and the pace of innovation that we see today. It's like, if you are trying to build, let's just use, Tula as an example, the next consumer products company or skincare company, like by the time that business is launched, the things that did work, like Facebook advertising, aren't going to be the things that will work in the future, because the next companies that win and accelerate will have done so because they exploited a new change in the market or a new arbitrage opportunity. And likely they were only able to have figured that out through experimentation. And so, in short, like, yes, experimenters could continue to grow with that organization and take on different roles. They could realize that an experiment that they've successfully executed and proven, maybe they want to scale that. So maybe I've proven out the sales channel and now I want to build the sales team as part of my career. That's exciting to me. That's certainly a path. And there's micro experiments in that with hiring and firing and so on, and management. And yet, another one is maybe they just move on to the next startup and they try to do it all over again in a totally different category. But the bottom line is that skill set of experimenting and getting the feedback loop and listening to the customer and listening to the market per this chapter of the book is like the most important ingredient, in my opinion, for how you can identify a problem solution and ultimately a business or a commercial stream for a business.
And so let's take us back to the beginning of Troops, and you've got this vision or this idea of messaging as being important and integrating that with sales platforms, and take us from like the kind of experiments that you were running that kind of gave you the confidence and helped you move in one direction versus the other. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, certainly. And so I'm going really, really all the way back to the really beginnings of Troops. It actually stemmed off of the work I was doing with Tula. When we were building Tula, we realized that we would at some point inevitably be in retail sales points of distribution, think Sephora and Ulta. And so then inevitably we would need salespeople that would be in store. And then we thought, man, how would we ever find, hire, train, manage those remote mobile workers? Man, wouldn't it be cool if we had almost like Uber for in-store freelance salespeople? You push a button and automatically people just show up and work on behalf of your business. And so that was really the first sort of inception of Troops. And so what we then went and did is we went and connected with our would-be customers. We went out and connected with other beauty companies that had the profile and characteristics of the companies we would sell to. They had products that were in store and a sales team to support it. And what we then realized was that, as I mentioned earlier, that this medium of messaging would perhaps be an ideal way to engage with a mobile workforce, because after all, who doesn't use messaging? And as we started doing those customer interviews, we realized two things. Number one, that messaging, that medium to facilitate these interactions, was ridiculously awesome and valuable and really had legs. The other was that those customers, due to the type of business they were retailers, manufacturers, they also cared about things unique to them. Things like how much product were sold in the stores, how productive were those people in those stores. It was very retail specific. And I remember we had a fork in the road and we're like, do we want to be a business that serves companies that are perhaps in a dying industry with retail, maybe not dying, but not quite what it was? Or could we rethink or really accelerate that messaging first CRM concept to every company on earth? And what do we want to do as entrepreneurs? What's more core to who we are? And so again, I'm not really a beauty guy. My background's engineering. I was at another tech company before. My other co-founder also worked at a fast-growing SaaS company that had an exit. And we knew a lot of the would-be customers in the bucket of sell this to everybody, sell this as messaging for CRM. And so that became what Troops is today. We sort of fired some of those first customers. They did not become as important to us as we thought they were originally. And instead, we shifted the focus, and the business became much more about, again, what I mentioned earlier, this idea that every company on earth needs to manage information on their customers, their pipeline, their revenue. Every company on earth has a database or CRM or systems to manage that. And most of those companies, probably all of them, actually all of them to date, have all used the same methods, the same user interface paradigms. And we thought if we could reimagine that in a way that's globally ubiquitous, literally everyone with a phone on earth knows how to do messaging, then the total addressable market and the size and scale of the opportunity of that version of the business was far more exciting to us. And again, what's cool to think about now, fast forwarding today, is again, Salesforce acquired Slack for $30 billion, totally validating that concept from 5 years ago.
And so how do you, that just sounds like such a wide open, you have the opportunity to sell to essentially so many different kinds of businesses. How do you decide what to focus on then? Like, are you focusing on certain types of businesses, certain industries, certain practices?
Yeah, great question. So to carry on that journey, when we were building this messaging interface, we were doing so first off of text messaging, and we just sort of knew that messaging was so important and would be more important, at least in work in the enterprise. And so we realized that text SMS wasn't enough. We needed a messaging interface that contemplated both messages, but also lightweight interactions like buttons. Hey John, would you like to update this thing? Click of a button, yes or no, versus typing out yes. And they're like, all right, we need to build our own sort of messaging interface that has the combination of those things. And moreover, we need a concept of channels to organize those messages, not by name or person, but by company. And so we started building that. And then all of a sudden we saw this other startup building basically the same thing, just better than us. And then I remember that company announced, they announced three things at once. And so more specifically, Slack announced that they were launching a developer platform. They announced their growth rate numbers, which were insane. And they announced an $80 million fund dedicated to investing in companies building in and on their ecosystem. And when we saw that, we were like, okay, that's really interesting and compelling. We should actually make a big bet, back to this experimenting or not. This was one of those things where we didn't invest or build that infrastructure, but we did make a big bet. And the bet was Slack would be pretty important in the future. They would probably be a publicly traded company and would be quite pervasive. And we were the first venture-backed business to really go all in on Slack. We were their first Series A, Series B, and follow-on investment. In fact, we were at the New York Stock Exchange with them when they did their direct listing, and their founder and CEO has mentioned this a few times on their public earnings calls. And so when we did that, we then had this Venn diagram of companies that use Salesforce and companies that use Slack. And the reality is most companies, many companies use Salesforce. They are the leader in their respective category. So we felt like we had pretty good air cover there. But on the Slack piece, the companies that were adopting Slack, they were really the early adopters. They really were the tech companies. And so that made it pretty easy for us to focus on the qualifications of things like fast growing SaaS or media tech company that also had a commercial team. And so that began to help us focus even further on where we spent our time. And so it wasn't vertical per se, it was more like horizontal, if you will, characteristics of how we qualify those customers.
And how did, once you kind of had that figured out, then how do you reach those customers in that space?
Yeah, then we're back to sales and marketing. How do we find them, get in front of them? And so we're still experimenting with the best ways to do that. And so we would attend conferences. We would go, Slack every year would have their own customer conferences. We would be exhibitors and have a booth. We would try to haggle together lists of companies we felt used both Salesforce and Slack, and we'd cold call them, or we'd cold email them. We'd ask for introductions. We started writing, and we still create a lot of content marketing, blogs, how-tos. We have a podcast now where we invite industry leaders and executives from a lot of our customers and wannabe partners to join us in content and conversation around where the world is going in terms of work and so on. And so we are still trying to answer that question in a way that's the most effective. And that is at least for our business right now, one of the last most exciting questions for us to answer. And now again, with how the market has evolved, we think that more people, not less, will be looking for this sort of thing than they were before. Because before, this was, I tell this story, it's sort of like, if I told you needed to use this box that plugged into a wall to do work, you'd say, what do I need that computer for? I have a perfectly good typewriter. And I think that is a bit of a challenge that we've seen with our business because we have been so early and evangelical. We're telling people that they should think about solving really important problems with what is effectively chat and messaging. And to many, that just seems so like such a big gap, which is why, again, there's a lot of education and content that we had to create. But now the market's moved, and we think more people, not less, have a bit of a prepared mind. And so we think not only finding them will be easier, but selling and working with them will be easier as well.
And do you try and pick up when you're trying to make the pitch to new customers, are you picking up performance data from your existing customers? You can kind of show the effectiveness, the speed, faster booking sales or things like that?
Absolutely. With the earliest customers, we did this. We got them deployed. They would use our product, and we started to create with them case studies, and we would measure with them before and after snapshots so that we can tell credibly stories of how we helped companies like Thycotic increase their response time to service tickets from 75% to 99%. Or we're helping companies like Square increase their forecast accuracy by 20 to 30%. And so we had to do that work and tell these stories so that when we have the next conversation with the next skeptical customer, we can point to evidence and say, this isn't just an idea that we think is good. This is an idea that is legitimately good, and here's proof. And so even today, we'll still try to create those stories and create those pieces of ROI feedback wherever and however we can.
Got it. And let's turn to the book for a minute. Are there did the chapter that you read, did it resonate with you? Did you feel like there was parts of it that that didn't really fit with your thinking, or what were your overall thoughts on the chapter?
It totally resonated with me. There's a company I'm an investor in, and the CEO is telling me a story just yesterday about how one of their competitors, who they've been afraid of, they're no longer afraid of. And the reason is they got some color commentary around how the founders and CEOs spend zero time with the customer. And I overlap that with the fact that over the past year, they've been stealing customers left and right from said competitor. And the reason they're doing that is they spend a whole lot of time with the customers. They understand the pain point. They understand what problems they are trying to solve because they are having the conversations and getting those learning loops and feedback from the customer. And so in any business, enterprise or consumer, there is always a way to get feedback from the customer. And I think the people that do that the fastest and the most effectively will win. At the same time, you need to also be mindful of the macro of the market. It takes just as much effort to build a successful company in a small industry or a small business as it does in a big industry. And so while talking to customers is important and you can be the best in the world at that learning loop, it also still needs to be married with a whole other set of dimensions that are important for the company's success.
Got it. If there was anything you would change about the chapter, what would it be?
If there's anything I would change about the chapter, nothing immediately. I think it articulated the points well. My biggest takeaway from it was the importance of experimenting and having the conversations, and like at the essence, when you're starting a business, any business, that is essential, because ideas are nothing without execution, and the execution is only going to happen if you really understand if there's merit to the idea, and they're only really going to understand that if you do your homework and go have conversations and learn from the people that you're ultimately going to sell to. Like I talk about this often with new hires that we make at the businesses about we have a value at Troops about being customer obsessed. I think Amazon has this too. We might have stolen it from them, which is totally fine. And the idea is simple. It's like businesses are in business to make money. How do you make money? You build something of value for the customer. They get the value from you and they give you money for it. And if you rinse and repeat that, then they give you more money and you can invest in more things and build more products that create more value. And you've got this amazing flywheel and you have this hopefully much bigger and more successful company. But that only happens if you have that learning loop with who you are ultimately building for and selling to.
Got it. And this chapter doesn't actually have this, but some of the challenges that many entrepreneurs have commented on earlier chapters is that in the book, there's a lot of attention to like process and documents. And I think the reason why the book is set up that way is I think they're trying to create a kind of a guidebook, a roadmap that entrepreneurs can follow, where they're not going to lie to themselves, that they're forced to kind of like, create a report and kind of look at it or organize information in a certain way and look at it so they can really be objective, which is what this is about. So you don't overinvest in something that it really isn't there. And that kind of begs the question to me is like all along this path with all these different companies that you're building, like how do you keep track? How do you document these experiments that you're running? Is it all just in your head and in your team's head? Do you have any kind of systems in place? And frankly, given your business, I can imagine that that it's close. This kind of question is closely tied to what you're doing with the integration with Salesforce and kind of tracking down customers for other companies.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the business. So for something like a B2B company, documenting that feedback is pretty easy and standard in a CRM, for example. You have a list of company names that you're speaking with, the nature of the conversation, then key things you want to learn. So what do you care about? So things like classic things like who are the decision makers? What's their pain point? What's the budget? What's their willingness to spend on a solution like X for the problem and discussion and so on. I think for a consumer company, for example, that's a little bit trickier because you can't go have a conversation with millions of potential consumers in an example like a skincare company. But what you can do is you can still have conversations with some people. And so in that sense, you can still have a similar framework, which is like, what products do you use? What do you like and don't like about it? What's the price point you're willing to pay? So you can still do a much smaller sample, but then you can elevate that a little bit more. And you can do things like paid advertising just to measure click rates and response rates and so on. So it kind of all comes back to a broader view of experimenting and learning. And the experiments will inevitably be different for the business, and that's totally fine. And so wherever appropriate, those are documented, but they look wildly different, or they look not wildly different, but different business to business. And then in terms of the experiments that I'm most trying to solve in the earliest days of the company is there something I can make that somebody will give me money for and love and feel good about it? And so like in B2B, that's pretty simple, which is it's if I give you this piece of software, or in the early days of Troops, if I give you a letter that you sign that says, once this software is delivered, you agree to pay me some money. Like I've just sort of validated that there's a there. Whereas in other products or companies like Tula, for example, I could not have done that really, because I needed to actually make the product first to see if they would pay for it. And so in some businesses, there's a little bit of a leap of faith, before you push the button to manufacture 100,000 units of something. Like there's a bit of a gap, but there are things you can do to de-risk it, like still investigate and interview potential customers.
Awesome. So, to close out our conversation for today, I really appreciate your time. I thought I'd go back to right after graduation from college. And for many people, this transition involves like their first job. And in your story, a big part of this period for you was a company called Spinback. And so if you could just talk us through like the story there, how you became, how that all came to be and how that turned out.
Yeah. So leaving college, I put my second company on hold that I started at school because I had an opportunity to join a founder CEO, someone else that was building his startup. That company is called Lotame. And that was intriguing to me because he had started and sold another very successful online advertising technology company. And so for me, when I was graduating college, what I was optimizing for is to work with amazing people better than me that I can learn from, period, full stop. I could have gone at things on my own, but for me at that point, personally, I felt like that was the better decision for me. And so I ended up building that company from a very, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us to, 100 plus, zero in revenue to many tens of millions of revenue. And then along the way, stayed in touch with 2 other former classmates from Wisconsin that were toying around with another startup idea. And we just kept discussing the idea and the potential based on our shared collective experiences, and decided that it was time to leave that startup that I joined and go work on this other startup called Spinback with 2 buddies from school. And that company helped online brands and retailers measure how much money they were making from basically Facebook. This is about 2010. This is a time when pretty much every company in the world knew Facebook was important and they all wanted likes, but they didn't know what that meant in terms of dollars and cents. And so we connected the dots and we're able to show brands and retailers like QVC or like L'Oreal or Diet Chocolate how much money they were making. And so we built that business, and then along the way had an opportunity to, it was a fork in the road. We had an opportunity to raise money with one of the best investment, if not the best seed stage VC firm in the world, who's now my seed stage partner for Troops. And we also had an opportunity to be acquired and by another company called Buddy Media. That was the largest B2B platform on Facebook at the time. And so we faced the fork in the road, and ultimately we decided that merging the businesses was the better outcome for a number of reasons. And we went down that path, and about 13 months later, we were acquired by Salesforce. And so definitely other ways that could have went, but that's the way it unfolded. And as a result, that's helped accelerate my learning and, things in my career, and put me in a position to now be where I am, building, Troops and Tula.
Great. And so I guess for a closing question here, what thoughts or advice do you have for other entrepreneurs or folks that are thinking about start a company, and especially in this in COVID environment? What thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the first question you asked me on this call, which is, should people start a business in college? And I think the answer is absolutely. Like, again, you have an amazing safety net. If things don't work out, you go to class. And if you need help, you have the network and support structure around you at the university, and of course the internet, to help make those dreams a reality. And you also have the benefit of not knowing what you don't know. And so I think about the CEO and founder of, I think, is it Southwest Airlines? And I think there's like a famous quote of him saying, he was the most qualified person to start an airline company because he never worked for one or worked in one. And he has total fresh perspective. He's not jaded. He's not biased. And so the younger you are, the more pure your thoughts and ideals are. And that can be incredibly powerful. And therefore would try to take advantage of it when you're young. And if things go well and you have that conviction, then, you could hit that fork in the road on do you hit the eject button from school and go full time? But in short, the best advice I have would be, if you're in school and you want to start a company, now is the best time to do so.
Great. Thank you, Dan. What a great closing message, and really appreciate you sharing the time with us today and all of your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, John.
Great. Awesome.